to the Maritime Decarbonisation book launch. I'm Rick Watson, the Research Director of Digital Frontier Partners in Melbourne, Australia. I wrote the book's preface, which apparently qualifies me to moderate the launch of this book on maritime decarbonisation. We will start with a short video statement of the importance of maritime decarbonisation by Cleopatra Doumbia-Henry, who's the former president of the World Maritime University.
This book comes at a moment in time when the intervention of the maritime industry is most needed in our urgent battle against climate change. Written with timely expert analysis and commentary from numerous maritime experts, the book reflects holistic perspectives and implications of decarbonization in great depth with respect to climate change. Stakeholders are asking themselves how to best approach the imminence of the challenges that they are to face as they reorganize their supply chains across the industry. For urgently embarking on the important journey of maritime decarbonization and addressing climate change, I wish to congratulate Mikael Lind and Wolfgang Lehmacher.
And now we will hear from Jan Hoffmann, who's the head of trade logistics at UNCTAD, and he will follow up with some further remarks on the important contribution of this book's editors and authors to the decarbonisation of shipping.
The book Maritime Decarbonization could not have come out at a more opportune moment. The International Maritime Organization is embarking on an ambitious, revised strategy to decarbonize maritime transport. And at UNCTAD, we've just last week launched our latest review with a special chapter on exactly this topic, maritime decarbonization, at the IMO headquarters in London. A key insight from our analysis is that, well, greenhouse gas emissions have been going up while they should be going down. On the positive side, the emissions per ton mile have improved, gone down. However, about half of this improvement is due to economies of scale, not technological improvements, nor the use of alternative fuels. Not yet. But we should get there rather sooner than later. And to get there, to actually reverse the trend and reduce emissions, we all need to read the book. The book Maritime Decarbonization gives us practical tools and case studies, plus what the editors call decarbonization enablers. In the lead up to the production of the book over the last years, I had the privilege to join forces with the editors in a number of conferences and seminars, and at UNCTAD, we could support this endeavor by hosting several insightful articles and blog posts, which I think we can consider precursors to some of the book's chapters. Congratulations to the editors, publisher, and the authors. Seeing such an illustrious group of experts as authors for the book makes me even more optimistic that we will get there. It is possible. We can achieve a green and just energy transition in maritime transport. Thank you. Thank you all very much.
We very much appreciate the time that Cleopatra and Jan put into these videos. You've heard them extol on the depth of expertise on maritime decarbonisation, collected into a single reference book to guide the shipping industry on this essential voyage. A little bit of housekeeping now. Please mute your microphone if you're an attendee rather than a speaker. And please enter any questions in the chat. We will address these questions in the last 15 minutes of this session. This comprehensive coverage of the vital transformation emerged because of the considerable forethought and many hours of reviewing by the editors, Mikael Lind, Wolfgang Lehmacher, and Robert Ward. I'll now ask each of them to comment on the path to publication. And I'll start with Mikael Lind, who's a senior strategist at the Research Institutes of Sweden and an adjunct professor in maritime informatics at Chalmers University in Gothenburg. Mikael, tell us a bit about the journey to publish this book. When did the idea emerge?
Thanks a lot, Rick. I think we engaged under the orchestration by the Nordic West Office on an effort that resulted in what we call the practical playbook on maritime decarbonization, which was released during the UN Ocean Conference last year in Lisbon. Several of us or all of us, I think, almost were involved in that work, and we found that we should see if we can join forces in this collaborative endeavor together with others. So we made a series of articles in Maritime Executive, Lodestar, and also the UNCTAD Trade Facilitation newsletter. By taking that practical playbook as a foundation, we found and got to a point where we framed a 4-step process to decarbonization action. That 4-step process was coined with scenario analysis, value chain mapping, enabler prioritization, and partnership selection. So the purpose of this book is to inspire collaboration, raise awareness, and motivate to act now in order to reach and respond to the climate targets, and also to illustrate the multifaceted opportunity of maritime decarbonization with these many enablers. So this book then will and is providing practical insights divided into 6 parts, where we both are looking into outlining the baseline and perspective. We forward this step-by-step concept for decarbonizing shipping. We bring the 4-step concept to life, and then we elaborate on some critical success factors for fast and global decarbonization. And then there's numerous case studies on selected maritime decarbonization initiatives. And this book has been co-authored by 70+ authors.
You know, this is your second important book for the maritime industry. You were involved in maritime informatics coming out a couple of years ago. You typically learn from one activity and continue on to the next activity. What was different about publishing this book?
I think, first of all, I got and it was actually, Rick, 2 books on maritime informatics.
That's right, yeah.
We were tempted to that we missed some perspectives in the first one, and therefore we needed to make an additional one. But I'm really inspired to take in this more collaborative efforts of bringing a lot of people together and a lot of perspectives together, as we did in those 2 books. And here, as in the early case, there is a common concern shared by a coalition of willing. I think that is super important that we see that. However, in this case, we also put even stronger efforts in trying to align the different co-authors by using this decarbonization framework, using that as a uniting force among those 70+ co-authors.
Yeah, the framework struck me as quite a significant improvement from the first book. So what's the next major maritime book you're going to write? What's the next big problem we need to address in the industry?
I think I have 2 cases on the table, and let's see what we can do about that. The first one would be a book on maritime collaborative innovation, and the second one would be a book on collaborative maritime supply chains. Let's see which comes first.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Now we'll ask Wolfgang Lehmacher for some information and input on the book. Wolfgang is a board member at Supply Chain and Technology Strategist. He's an expert in logistics, but currently he's been suffering some logistics problems and so he has had some problems joining us today. Wolfgang, what must board members of maritime companies know about decarbonisation?
Yeah, very good question, Rick. It is very good because it requires a major effort of the boards. So what do the boards need to know? So first, decarbonization is a systemic challenge. So what we have in front of us is in fact a decarbonization ecosystem, which is a system of systems. And what do I mean by that? We have the equipment system, which is ships, engines. We have the energy system, which has to produce alternative fuels. We have even the steel system and so on. And at the center of these systems sit value chains, but I let others talk about the value chain. So the challenge with the system is that, or the system of systems, that if you wish to change, you need to press the right buttons. So you need in the energy system to produce the alternative fuel. You need in the shipbuilding system the right engines and very new ship design, etc., etc. So we have to change our thinking far beyond our companies and understand that we need to collaborate with the other system, which we haven't done before. Then, very short, because that's very important, there is a broad menu of different enablers. And we have listed quite a number of enablers. I see them today as groups of enablers. So you have a full group around the ship. You have a full group around the port. You have a full group of enablers around ship operations, etc., etc. And then the last point, what the boards need to know is, and we see the writing on the wall, regulation is coming. So we have a system which we need to redesign. We have a lot of enablers that we need to activate. And I think we should start better sooner than later, because it is better to build knowledge and advantage before the regulators force us to act.
So I really like this systems of systems way of framing the problem. And it raises it to the highest level in the organisation, because you've got to get multiple systems have to interact. Does this mean that boards should have a decarbonisation committee or a decarbonisation specialist on the board?
I have always been very skeptical about committees. So in general, because I think it's important to embed things like even sales in the entire organization, operational thinking in the entire organization. But as we are facing I would say a gigantic challenge here, which we need to break down in pieces, I think we should start with a committee, a decarbonization or sustainability committee. And for me, the priority number one, the priority task number one is to think how decarbonization or sustainable practices or sustainable thinking or decarbonization thinking can be embedded in the entire organization, because it is so broad. And therefore, I think we can dissolve the committee or give that responsibility of of overseeing it to one of the key committees. Could be the risk committee, which a lot of companies have, and then run decarbonization out of the entire organization as part of the DNA.
Let me call upon some of your other expertise. You're a strategist in supply chain. How will decarbonisation change the supply chain?
If I knew, Rick, but I can say that it will change the supply chains. And I always speak about supply chain network because it's not all linear. There's a lot of parallel, and I see it more as a network. But I think everything will change. The design will change. We will, to decarbonize. We, as I said, we need to go in steps. So optimizing routes, maybe shortening transport, optimizing is one way. The equipment will change, so everything what we use needs to be designed based on circular principles. I'm a big advocate of the circular economy because without circular economy there will be no net zero economy, and in that sense there is a lot to be done on the equipment side. I think that the fuels will change. I would like to allude on one point which I included at the end of the book, which is wind. Wind is not a fuel, so I start with fuel, but wind is not a fuel. But I think that we should put more effort into understanding how we can use wind and wind technology to reduce carbon emissions. And there are very interesting studies out there.
Thank you for your insights on the system of system problem that we have to solve. Thanks, Wolfgang. The third editor is Robert Ward, who's the former Secretary General of the International Hydrographic Organization. Speaking as one of the co-editors, Robert, what has impressed you about the contents of the book and its contributing authors?
Thanks, Rick. Well, first, I'd like to say that I think Mikael and Wolfgang have done a great job gathering together such an impressive group of contributing authors. And what has struck me as one of the book's three editors, with Mikael and Wolfgang, is the range of the topics and the many different aspects of the maritime transportation chain that the authors have covered. They provided practical information on what's required for people to make positive, ecologically sound and financially acceptable progress on decarbonisation. In other words, what in practical terms can we be doing? What are the issues? What are the remedies? What are the pitfalls? And what are the benefits? So this means that there's something in the book for everyone involved in sea transport, whether you're an operator, an administrator, a regulator, a financier, an investor, or a customer. I've also been particularly struck by the fact that all the authors have written not from a theoretical textbook perspective, but from a practical, fact-based approach based on their own recent experiences, and they back that up with numerous real-world examples and references. So all in all, I'm very impressed with their efforts, and I think the book will be helpful and useful to everyone who reads it.
Thank you, Robert. And I was also struck by the practicality of the book. These are people who've rolled up their sleeves and started to work on the problem, and we can learn a lot from them. Let's now talk to some of the chapter authors, and we'll start with Katharina Renken, who's a global project manager at Hapag-Lloyd. Decarbonisation requires multiple major parties in this system of systems, such as marine fuel, suppliers, shipbuilders and maritime operators to collaborate. for decarbonisation. What mechanisms are in place to ensure successful collaboration or need to be in place?
Yeah, thank you, Rick. Thanks everyone for having me. It was a pleasure working on the book, of course, and now having this moment of presenting what we have all been working on over the last couple of months is actually an exciting moment. Yes, thanks for highlighting that, Rick. Yeah, let's go back a moment, and I would just want to point out a main aim of a company is, well, to survive and to make profit, right? Ideally, that's where we're coming from when we talk about the industry, and the profit comes from, yeah, creating value, and that brings us to the value chains, right? And we have to admit, at this point in time, value chains are not within one company; they're actually within extensive networks and global networks at that, which, you know, then we are also talking about shipping because things need to go from one place to the other. Everything is connected nowadays, not only we as persons, but also all the companies, all the trade. And that's something we just have to, yeah, wrap our heads around today. And then it comes to the point that decarbonization is a grand challenge, right, of our time. And that also means if we are all connected, not one entity can solve the problem themselves. And then we think back about yeah, the value chain and how everything is connected. We also need to think connectedly about decarbonization. It's one cannot do it. So for decarbonization in shipping, we detected three main value chains, and one of them being marine fuel value chain. We talked about fuel. Wolfgang pointed that out already. Shipbuilding value chain, which is at the very source, like at the very start of the ship, we have to build it, right? And then we talk about maritime operational value chains, and that brings us over the whole lifespan of the ship's existence, let's say. Yeah, and thanks for pointing that out. What mechanisms are in place, or what do we need? Well, we do need more collaboration. And so for that, we, in our book chapter, gave a 4-step process to develop a value chain approach to decarbonization in shipping. It does need cooperation. It does need working together. And that can be a push from the customer, right? That makes companies usually cooperate more across entities. If the customer demands it, somebody has to do it. There's another push that can come from the government. I think we will also hear more about the government perspective later today. And well, there can also be motivation within the company, right? Not everyone needs a push to do the right thing. Here at Hapag-Lloyd, we have detected that our biggest stakeholder, our biggest collaborator, should be also the ports, the terminals itself. We know that one of the biggest problems or the biggest emission from the ship is the fuel usage. So making the cooperation between us and the terminals go much better, we can save on our fuel on our sea leg. And that's what we're aiming for. We do have a digital tool for that we implemented in about 70 terminals globally at this point. And yeah, we think digital tools can help us climb across the borders and getting that cooperation going. And yeah, I think I think we do need the collaboration, and it cannot be one. It has to go between companies, between governments, between companies and governments, but also the end customer can do quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. You suggested that ports are the biggest collaborator. Let me pull in this another system idea, in that if you have a ecology, there's often a keystone predator or animal or species or something like that. Is there a keystone player in decarbonisation that is the key determinant of success? Is it the ports, or are there several keystones here that have to work closely together to make this transition?
Yeah, I would actually answer the second part, right? There are several keystone players that have a significant impact on the shipping industry, and of course that's the ships, the ship owners, because they can influence the shipbuilding process to the largest extent. I would claim. Also, the customer has a say, of course. But let's go with, the ship owners are one big cornerstone or keystone. The ports and the terminals as our, connecting points between the ships, let's say, between the countries, are very crucial. Usually not as much organized, though, right? Terminals are very local. But they do have a crucial impact on their local area. And we have global terminal operators that then even can play a global role in that. So we work with the port chain project I just highlighted. We, for example, work quite successfully also with DP World terminals. And that's global. That stretches quite far immediately. So yeah, there's several actors, big actors that need action or that need to take action. But I would also say we need researchers, we need motivated industry leaders, and we need tons of inspired people to make this change work.
Thank you. And the important point that we're hearing is that as a self-organizing ecosystem or a system of systems, there are many key players that have to collaborate in order to solve this important existential problem. Let's now ask Kirsi Tikka, who's a board member of Ardmore Shipping, Pacific Basin Shipping and Foreship, a few questions from a high level, and that is, what's the main contribution of this book to ship owners?
Thank you, Rick, and good day to all. Now, shipping tends to be an invisible industry, even though it is a very important industry. The industry has a legacy, contractual, and regulatory framework that has developed for many, many centuries. And it's quite challenging to change these legacy systems. And although it is a global industry supported by a wide shore-based infrastructure, as Katharina was talking about, the communication with other stakeholders has largely been limited to contractual transactions without further collaboration. And as my other colleagues have been talking today, this is now changing out of necessity. Shipping cannot decarbonize alone. And the book introduces views and perspectives from the wider ecosystem, as we've all heard. And it's really important for ship owners to know these perspectives and different views when they are working on their own decarbonization strategies for the energy transition.
So, as I hear you, you're saying we need a mindset change. We need to move from thinking about short-term transactions to this long-term strategic shift in the industry. Any thoughts on how that's going to happen or how you can make that happen?
Well, we already have many decarbonization enablers available to us today. Most of these focus on improving fuel efficiency, which translates then to reduction in carbon emissions. And if the entire industry decides to use these enablers, we can already make a big change today without waiting for that new alternative fuel that will be available for the entire industry. So that's the way to get started.
Okay. The book includes a number of case studies on decarbonisation initiatives, the things that the industry is changing without much influence by regulators. Do we need regulators? Is the industry proactive enough to avoid major regulation, maybe regulation it's not too keen on?
As I mentioned, the enablers that we have available today in scale are really focusing on the fuel consumption. And many of these improvements that can be made are very incremental. But these incremental changes add up, first on a single ship, then on the ship owner's fleet level, and then for the entire worldwide fleet. And we really need these measures to be taken up by the entire world fleet. We need them not only to reduce fuel consumption today, but also to prepare the worldwide fleet for the new alternative fuels, which are going to be expensive, and they have lower energy density. And we need the entire world fleet to be engaged. And this is where we need regulations. We need regulations that those parts of the industry who would be more reluctant to make these improvements will also participate in this effort.
So regulations raise the level of the playing field. Everybody has to rise to a new standard. You can't cheat. Is that a fair comment?
It is, and it will set a baseline. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't do more than what the regulations require, but at least it sets a benchmark.
Okay, thank you very much for your comments. I'd now like to introduce Sanjay Kuttan, who's the Global Centre for Maritime Decarbonisation. And Sanjay, in your chapter, you discuss three important issues: markets, operational and technological measures, and the use of alternative fuels. These are topics that Kirsi touched on, and the other authors as well. How will alternative fuel markets be different from the current fossil fuel market? Yeah, you're muted.
Yeah, thanks for that. You think after 3 years we'll get this right. But thank you for those who have logged on to listen. Thanks for the question. I think they'll definitely change. As there are three phases of change we need to think about: the early transition versus the accelerated adoption and the stabilized equilibrium in the end. I think we are at the stage where ports and producers need to really think where they're going to make these alternative fuels available. Most ports which are bunkering large volumes need to consider a multi-fuel scenario, because you can't depend on just supplying one type of fuel. So there is going to be a multi-fuel scenario. There are going to be ports that need to rethink their availability of fuels vis-a-vis the energy transition that is happening on the land side. So there must be a coupling between the energy transition on the land side with what's available in the port, because shipping will not scale at the pace that power generation can scale in terms of using up molecules. So there is going to be a change in that kind of demographics of fuel, where it's going to be available, right? And the other thing to remember, that shipping's purpose is to deliver goods, not to bunker. So they're going to have to then look at the ports that are going to be available for that bunker fuel, and recognizing the alternative fuels have also a lower energy, volumetric energy density, which also means that fuel may not last as long as the old journeys would take. So which means new ports may have to come into play, and the strategic decisions on where to bunker and where to deliver goods is going to be the new optimization of fleet owners. I think when you look at regional shipping, it's a lot easier than international shipping. But then again, it depends on the port, it depends on the energy transition on the land side, and it depends on the ecosystem within the port. That means the bunkering ecosystem, both from a tank storage, the bunker operator, and the capabilities of the bunker crew to handle alternative fuels. These are all different things that needs to come into play before any port or any terminal is going to be ready to provide the alternative fuel. So I anticipate, yes, to that question, it will be different for a while to come, until there's some kind of stability in the whole supply-demand equation.
So one of the things that interests me is in the current bunkering system, we're very dependent upon fossil fuels, which means we're very dependent upon a few countries in the world. Will alternative fuels reduce the reliance on a few well-placed or well-endowed countries? Will it be a broader market and less political influence?
Well, the IMO, the MEPC 80 has already stated that it will start calculating the life cycle of these fuels, which means it is going to be from a well to wake, which also means that the 40% of fuel that's been moved around the world will suddenly have a carbon footprint that was never ever envisaged in the current calculations, right? So moving fuels around the world may not be the best way to decarbonize the sector, both energy and maritime sector. So we need to be clever, more clever about keeping the fuels closer to production or reducing the distance of travel. Now, the availability of renewable energy to couple itself to provide green hydrogen for green ammonia and green methanol is also going to be very critical in terms of the entire carbon footprint of the fuel before it even enters the vessel. And this is all going to be an important driver for the vessel owner when they start calculating their carbon intensity index in the near future when that becomes more established.
That's quite interesting. I hadn't thought of the aspect of shipping fuels, but there are a number of projects in Australia where people are talking about generating hydrogen and shipping it to Europe and Japan and places like that. That sort of defeats the whole purpose in many ways, doesn't it, of trying to decarbonise and increase sustainability. Will there be new key performance indicators for decarbonised shipping? I mean, you talked about measurements. What are the new measures?
Well, I think the big one that's been released, albeit with a troubled formula, is the CII, right? But I think IMO is committed to collecting data the whole of this year, the whole of next year. They said they will be analyzing the data, and hopefully in 2025, with a few correction factors, this equation will become better. It is riddled with problems, but I think most shipping industries, while complain about it, they realize something needs to be done. There must be a way to normalize because vessels are very different, the weights are very different, the routes are very different. So there must be a way to equalize in a way. Maybe mathematics will show the way eventually, but I think that's going to be a main driver because every year there's a tightening on the percentage reduction so that you have to maintain a band C on your as a minimum. And I think the question really is what kind of punitive damages if you are band E or band D, because if there's no consequence of being in those bands that are held accountable by the port states or the flag states of the ship, then it's an academic exercise. So I think new systems must come in place, but until everyone is sure about the methodology of calculating these numbers is accepted, new KPIs will come up. I think it's going to be driven by these carbon intensity index primarily.
So alternative fuels will be the new oil. It was a few years ago, someone wrote about data is the new oil. What sort of data will you need in order to be able to optimise the decisions that you mentioned earlier about placement of fuel sources and those types of issues? Those are critical optimization problems that typically are data intensive. Do we have that sort of data? Do we have the new oil to solve the old oil problem?
Well, I think if you break it up in parts, if you look at around the vessel today, there's a lot of data. I think IMO has been collecting data from vessels since 2016 or 2018. There's a mandate to do that. Today, the data availability on calculating your SFOCs of each vessel or engine is there. Optimization tools are there. I think the greater question which you are asking is, do we have sufficient transparency of data between what's happening on the land side transition versus what is expected on the maritime side transition? I'm not sure whether those two big depositories of data are talking to each other to optimize the entire fuel option supply chain. I'm sure the land side has it, and I'm sure the maritime has it, but has land and maritime talked to each other and say, how does this all mean in the greater scheme of things? I'm not completely sure about that.
Yeah, that's the system of systems perspective on the silo that we see in organisations where marketing and production don't share their data. And we've got a similar problem here. And that needs to be solved in order to address the optimisation problem. Well, thanks for giving us some insight into the Global Centre for Maritime Decarbonisation and the sorts of problems you're addressing. I'd
You're
now
welcome.
like to ask Jeremy Bentham, who's co-chair for scenarios of the World Energy Council and a retired head of Shell Scenarios. Why is scenario thinking important in developing the context for considering the maritime industry's complex issues?
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to see you all, and also to have thoughts on that question. Clearly, we've heard already how complex the whole maritime ecosystem is. So we're talking about a complex system, but it's subject to a whole set of forces, of currents in the world that go beyond the maritime industry, whether those are geopolitical or macroeconomic, environmental, technological, demographic. And these are very strong currents, and they all generate countercurrents. And you can't tell in advance at all which are going to end up being the strongest. So different types of outcome are always plausible. And so if you're thinking about the future landscape and how to position yourself in the future landscape, if you're not having some scenario thinking, you're basically being a bit lazy. So in the book, we introduce some broad-based maritime scenarios that everybody can use, but also give guidance on how to be able to take those and be more granular in particular areas, develop more granular scenarios that you can use to help make decisions yourself, because ultimately the scenario thinking is there to help you make richer decisions in a world that inevitably has these different plausible outcomes.
Sorry, I just had to disappear because I got a message that I was running out of energy. And I'm plugging in an alternative source.
Well, as a member of the World Energy Council, I'm glad you were able to find an alternative source.
I'm just about to plug it in, but I have another question for you. You know, as someone who deals with scenarios, you must wake up some mornings and say, oh, look, you know, like we did a morning or so ago when we saw the outbreak of violence in Israel. You know, that wasn't in my scenario. I've got to go out and revise it. How do you guard against those things? Or is that just the reality if you're a scenario specialist?
It is the reality, but what you know is that there is, if you like, tinder that is building up in different places, and something will spark at some point. So if you're a mature scenario thinker, then you're already thinking about not necessarily a specific thing at a specific time. These events, you can't predict a particular event, but you can try and understand those systems of systems and be prepared for that kind of activity. I go back to, say, the financial crisis triggered by Lehman Brothers collapse in September 2008. Essentially, my company, we already had recession and recovery scenarios that we could tune to that particular event and be on the front foot in responding to it.
So the secret seems to be to have a wide range of scenarios that you can say, we've already looked at that situation, you can pull it out and revise it slightly and then act upon that.
That's right. I mean, the scenarios are a learning tool that can help prepare you, as well as help you make better choices as you look at different kinds of things that can happen in future.
In the chapter, you write of two crafts in scenario thinking. Can you say a little more a bit about that? A bit more about that, please.
Yeah, this is quite important because there are two crafts and one tends to get neglected. So the background to this is that you're really trying to surface fresh insights and bring them to life in the minds, hearts, and decisions of others. And that bringing together various perspectives is an analytical craft. And there is a craft to it, to bring together technological or environmental or commercial perspectives. But bringing things to life in the minds of others is a social craft. And in fact, even if you look at the report that Michael mentioned earlier, or this book, the scenario thinking sets a context. That initial study was based on bringing together people to develop scenarios. So that process enabled different views to come onto the table. By the end of the work, in the report, it hardly features at all. It's just mentioned that there are these things, but it was a really important part of the process of development because it enabled these different perspectives to come together and not compete and have advocates, but to have people exploring them.
Yeah. So the social process is very important in developing scenarios. So what's the major uncertainty that exists in decarbonisation? If you're developing a scenario, what might be the uncertainty that would force you to fork some of these scenarios and say, we need to go in this direction, and then we need to backtrack and go in that direction?
If you look at all the kinds of credible scenarios that are facing industry, that are facing the energy system more broadly, you could think of them in terms of the pace of decarbonisation being faster or slower. And so that's a key uncertainty. But if you dig a bit deeper, you'll find it's not necessarily a thing about the same things going faster or slower. It's the timing of when the stars align, because when they happen, things go fast. So when will the stars align around a new engine technology, and then it will go fast? So there's explosive growth that's happening at different times, sometimes in different places as well. So you really, if you're thinking about explosive opportunity or backlashes, policy backlashes and explosive disruption, you're needing to make choices about being on the front foot and the extent to which you can be an early mover ahead of some of these changes or a follower in these things. And I think that's one of the big choices that come up for every player in this ecosystem.
So how do we bring together all of the keystone players, as I mentioned earlier when we were talking to Katharina, in order to align and create a scenario that's going to be successful? At least they understand how the pieces will fit together in their scenario.
Well, I think all of us who are active in this sphere kind of have to promote that view that Katharina raised earlier about collaboration, but also just understanding of the whole of the supply chains, understanding the whole of the ecosystem, and just building this recognition. And I think this book should help building this recognition that being on the front foot for these inevitable changes is going to be significant for every player. This change may not happen this year, but it may happen this year, but it's certainly going to happen in the next 5 or 10 years. So being prepared for that and recognizing that you need to work with others, with that recognition, then you can get, I think, some of the maritime groupings that others are more familiar with to act more proactively.
Thank you very, very much, Jeremy, for helping us to think about the future and how we will plan for the future. In the remaining time, we are going to throw it open to questions from the audience, and I will have a look at the chat line, and you will also note details of how to purchase the book, and in particular, you can get a 20% discount on the book. I would like to thank the editors and the authors for their contributions so far, and I hope they're going to answer all the questions. So let's have a look what we've got in the chat line, and we've got one question raised there. Let's see, where is it? Aha. So here you'll see a question about what is your view on Web3? You all see that question? It's after the introduction where Mikael came in and said, put your questions here. Anybody want to address the issue of Web3 port initiatives? So let's put that aside in the too hard basket on this occasion. Next question, is there a website with a comprehensive description of the endeavour? Web 3.0, Internet of Value, blockchain and distributed ledger are well known. So I think the person is asking about, is there a website for decarbonisation? Sanjay, do you want to talk about what's on your website?
Yeah, sure. I mean, on our website, we feature all our initiatives at the moment. I mean, we're only 2 years old, so there's not much there except for the initiatives we're running, and there's some articles and papers that are there. But yeah, it's still very focused on pilots and demonstration. You will find now on our website the extensive GCMD BCG industry survey on maritime decarbonization that was just launched. So you can download a free copy there. And then the ammonia safety study is also available on our website that can be downloaded as well. So these two are already available to the public for free if they want to expand their knowledge on ammonia safety in bunkering and the GCMD BCG industry survey on maritime decarbonization.
Okay, thank you. Mikael, what will people find on the Maritime Decarbonisation site that you just set up details?
Yeah, and there we have captured and first of all the different contributors are profiled on the book, and also the different teasers of each of the 34 chapters that are captured in these 504 pages that the book actually is today. And we also have a number of different articles also covered there.
Okay, thank you. The next question I'll
you have,
sorry,
you have more input from both Kirsi and Jeremy and Wolfgang here.
Okay.
Okay, I'll start. So there are also a number of other collaborative initiatives, well-known Global Maritime Forum and so forth, Maersk, McKinney, Muller Center for Decarbonization. And we do cover these different collaborative efforts in the book. So I don't recall the number of the chapter that covers these different collaborative initiatives, but you can find that information in the book. And they all have fairly extensive websites and very, very valuable information on decarbonization. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Jeremy, you want to say something?
Yes, I think some have already been covered by Mikael and Kirsi, but there are really good technological insights and information and data that have been developed by independent objective groups such as the Energy Transitions Commission. So if you go to the Energy Transitions Commission, you can find elements there that are very relevant to the maritime industry, and also the related Mission Possible Partnership, which focuses on the harder to abate sectors, has again a good collaboration, but also a good set of reports and data that I think people can find helpful as a complement to the kind of book that we have.
Thank you. And Wolfgang, if you unmute yourself, thank you.
Yeah, I would like to go back to the Web3 and make a few comments. I think usually in applications and solutions and not in technology. So Web3 is a technology, and it has its place. It's relatively new. I have written about this in German, unfortunately, but in the context of circular economy. So I think that innovation is extremely important for the whole decarbonization, and maybe that hasn't been addressed sufficiently. And there is no silver bullet. So this is also something important, that we have to use different technologies, different enablers, to combine them to have impact on our carbon footprint. So my thinking is simply Web3 has its place. Web3 is good. Blockchain is also mentioned. It helps, for example, in building trust, which is important in collaboration, in particular between parties that don't know each other. So I appreciate all projects, as the one in the chat, that help to build trust and give certain comfort when people share data. How that will all help to drive new solutions, this is an entire discussion, but certainly technology is very important. And that's leads to another point, and sorry, I don't want to make it too long, but the whole situation of global fragmentation, in fact, doesn't help the innovation. It could, if you take it from a competitive point of view, but shipping is a global industry, so we need some kind of a global bracket within which innovation happens and solutions are built. So I use that Web3 to talk about innovation and the importance of it in the decarbonization of the maritime sector.
Thanks, Wolfgang. There's a question about nanotech sensors, and the real question, I think, is why is there a reluctance to use sensors? Which to me says there's a reluctance to use data to make decisions. Is that a general observation that others find relevant or true?
Rick, maybe I'll chime in here with my limited experience, and that is a lot of vessels have a lot of sensors. They are already collecting a lot of data. There's a lot of data down there. I think the question people should be asking themselves, what do I want to use the data for? So that's going to drive the type of sensor I'm going to put on. There's no point just putting a sensor and getting data and then I don't know what to do with it. There's no so what, And I think if you look at ships today, I mean, the majority of the major ship liners and owners and operators already have sensors. In fact, they work with the Nautilus Labs of the world, the Alpha Auris of the world. There's Wärtsilä Digital, Kongsberg Digital, all of them have a lot of sensors and collecting a lot of data. So the so what's going to be important when you make a decision on installing a sensor. What am I going to do with the data? And just because it's a sensor that says, oh, I know this emission is CO2, great. So what do I do with that? I mean, I knew I will have CO2 because I was burning fossil fuel in the first place. So there must be a purpose in the thing. And I think that disconnect often happens, but when it does connect, people are installing sensors left, right, and center on ships.
So we've got about 2 minutes left. Do any of the authors want to make an additional comment on any of the questions or what they've heard this evening? Or this afternoon, wherever you are. It's evening for me.
Yeah, very quick. Sensors are important because they give accurate data. And that's important also for again, the trust discussion. And I think that's also what the comment in the chat is alluding to. In road transport, telematics is much better than calculations based on averages. So important point.
Mikael, you want to say something?
Yeah, I think that one case that we're also covering in the book is the Virtual Watchtower Network Initiative. And that is very much about seeing that you cannot really detach the reasoning of emissions in relation to supply chain activity. And what that is doing is basically trying to incentivize data sharing based on that the shippers provide a power of attorney to the transport service providers to actually share the data on emissions cost and delivery precision. And I think that is a new take that needs to be brought to the scene, to have the emissions and the delivery processes go hand in hand. Otherwise, we will not succeed with this.
Jeremy, you had your hand up. You had a comment.
Just a last comment is that there are questions here about alignment of interests in short-term versus long-term, and a lot of can be aided by recognizing that in these times of change, there are huge commercial opportunities in these alignments. And so to shift the mindset towards opportunity, rather than just seeing this as an imposed cost, I think is vital.
So I'd like to conclude by thanking the authors and the editors for their efforts to produce a very important book. Trade has been a major creator of the standard of living we enjoy today. It's been operating for thousands of years, particularly through shipping. It's thus critical that we decarbonise the maritime industry if we are to continue to raise our standard of living. And I thank the authors for their contribution to solving this important problem. Thank you, everybody, for attending today.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye.
It was a pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.